Oh, wow, that looks like a
Yeah,
strap, doesn't it?
Yeah, that is a strap.
Oh, my lordy.
Emma Culligan has been Oak Island's lead archaeologist for years, bringing scientific rigor to a search that's often been dominated by speculation and folklore. While others chased dramatic theories about Templars and pirate treasure, Emma quietly conducted systematic analysis of every artifact, every soil sample, every piece of physical evidence the team recovered. She's been the voice of caution, the scientist who wouldn't claim anything without data to support it. Which is exactly why her latest announcement has sent shockwaves through both the Oak Island team and the archaeological community. After 3 years of comprehensive scientific analysis, soil chemistry, artifact metallurgy, pollen dating, and isotope studies, Emma has compiled results that don't suggest or imply. They prove. There was a large-scale industrial operation on Oak Island in the mid-17th century, far more extensive than anyone imagined. And the chemical signatures, material residues, and geological evidence all point to one conclusion. This wasn't just treasure burial, it was treasure processing. The evidence indicates a sophisticated refining operation that processed precious metals on site before storage. The scale suggests years of continuous operation, not a quick burial. And the economic analysis, based on trace element concentrations and historical metal prices, indicates the operation handled materials worth between $180 to $220 million in modern currency. When Emma presented her findings to Rick and Marty, she did so with the methodical precision that defines her work. The science is conclusive. Oak Island hosted a secret colonial-era precious metal operation, and based on the residue concentrations, not all of it left the island. Hit like and subscribe, because Emma Culligan just turned Oak Island from a treasure legend into a scientifically documented historical site. And the implications for what's still buried there are extraordinary. The scientist's approach. Emma Culligan came to Oak Island with credentials that made her uniquely qualified for the challenge. A PhD in archaeology with specializations in metallurgy and chemical analysis, Emma had worked on historical sites across North America and Europe. She understood artifact preservation, soil chemistry, and how to extract maximum information from minimal physical evidence. When the Laginas hired her as lead archaeologist, they were getting someone who would transform their approach from treasure hunting to legitimate historical investigation. "My job isn't to find treasure," Emma told Rick during her first day on the island. "My job is to understand what happened here through scientific analysis of physical evidence. If that leads to treasure, excellent. If it leads to historical understanding without treasure, that's equally valuable." Rick appreciated her perspective. Years of searching had taught him that answers mattered as much as gold. Emma's methodology was systematic and comprehensive. Every artifact found on Oak Island was catalogued with meticulous detail: exact location, depth, soil context, preservation condition, and preliminary material analysis. She established protocols ensuring nothing was moved or cleaned until it had been properly documented. Archaeologists 100 years from now should be able to reconstruct exactly what we found and where we found it, Emma explained to the team. That requires obsessive documentation. But Emma's real innovation was applying advanced analytical techniques that previous Oak Island investigators had never used. While others had focused on artifacts themselves, coins, wood, metal objects, Emma studied what those artifacts left behind in the soil. Every human activity leaves chemical signatures, Emma explained during a team meeting. When you work metals, residues seep into the surrounding soil. When you store organic materials, decomposition creates specific chemical profiles. When you burn particular fuels, Ash deposits reveal what was burned. The soil remembers everything, if you know how to read it. Emma began systematic soil sampling across Oak Island, creating a grid pattern that covered every significant area. Samples were collected at multiple depths, carefully sealed, and sent to specialized laboratories for analysis. The tests were extensive: heavy metal concentrations, organic compound profiles, isotope ratios, pollen analysis, and chemical signatures of human activity. Each test cost thousands of dollars. The comprehensive analysis Emma designed cost over $200,000. Money the Laginas invested because they trusted Emma's scientific approach. "This seems expensive for dirt analysis," Marty observed, reviewing the laboratory bills. "It's expensive for definitive answers," Emma corrected. "We're not guessing anymore about what happened on this island. We're measuring it." The first results came back in late winter, and they immediately caught Emma's attention. Soil samples from Smith's Cove showed elevated concentrations of lead, copper, and silver. Not just traces, but levels that indicated significant metalworking activity. "These aren't naturally occurring concentrations," Emma explained to the research team. "This is industrial-level contamination from metal processing. Someone was working precious metals at this location, and doing it at a scale that left permanent chemical signatures in the soil." But that was just the beginning. As more results returned from the laboratories, a pattern emerged that was far more significant than Emma had anticipated. Multiple locations across Oak Island showed similar chemical signatures. Not random contamination, but systematic evidence of coordinated industrial activity. The locations formed a pattern: specific areas for processing, storage, and transport, all organized in ways that suggested careful planning rather than random treasure burial. "This wasn't pirates burying stolen gold," Emma said, studying the pattern on a map of the island. "This was an organized operation with multiple facilities working together. That suggests long-term presence, significant resources, and sophisticated knowledge." Emma spent months analyzing the data, consulting with experts in historical metallurgy, colonial industry, and archaeological chemistry. She wanted to be absolutely certain of her conclusions before presenting them to the team. What she discovered exceeded anything she'd anticipated when she started the analysis. The evidence. Emma's comprehensive analysis revealed evidence of an operation far more extensive than any theory about Oak Island had suggested. The chemical signatures weren't just present. They were layered, showing years of continuous activity rather than a brief visit. Soil core analysis revealed stratification that indicated the operation had functioned for at least 8 to 10 years, possibly longer. "We can date the activity through multiple methods," Emma explained during her presentation to the team. "Pollen analysis shows specific plant species present during the operation that only grew in this region during certain decades. Isotope dating of organic material in contaminated soil layers gives us precise timeframes. Everything points to 1745 to 1755 as the primary operational period. But it was the metallurgical evidence that told the most compelling story. Emma had collected residue samples from locations across the island, material that had been dismissed as corrosion or natural soil contamination. Chemical analysis revealed these residues contained gold, silver, copper, and lead in specific proportions that matched historical refining processes. They weren't just storing raw ore, Emma explained. They were refining it on site. These chemical signatures match documented cupellation processes, a technique used to separate gold and silver from lead. It requires specialized equipment, controlled temperatures, and significant expertise. Dr. Aaron Taylor, the team's researcher, immediately understood the implications. Cupellation wasn't something casual miners did. This was professional metalworking. That means trained specialists, proper facilities, and significant investment. Emma nodded. Exactly. And the scale of residue concentration suggests they processed substantial quantities of material. We're not talking about occasional small batches. We're talking about industrial-level precious metal refining. But perhaps the most significant evidence came from isotope analysis of the metal residues. Different metal sources have unique isotopic fingerprints based on where the ore originated. Modern analytical techniques can identify these signatures with extraordinary precision, allowing researchers to trace metals to specific mining regions. Emma had metal residue samples from Oak Island analyzed by 3 independent laboratories, specializing in archaeological metallurgy. The results were consistent and shocking. The isotope signatures matched South American colonial mining regions, specifically areas that were under Spanish control in the mid-17th century. The metals processed on Oak Island came from South American mines, Emma announced. The isotope signatures are a perfect match for documented Spanish colonial operations in Peru and Bolivia during the period we've dated the Oak Island activity to. The implications were staggering. Spanish colonial metals being refined on a remote island off Nova Scotia suggested a secret operation to process and hide wealth outside Spanish imperial control, possibly by French interests, possibly by colonial administrators hedging against political instability. But Emma's analysis went further. Using the concentration levels of metal residues and the documented efficiency of 18th-century refining processes, she could estimate how much material had been processed through the Oak Island operation. The calculations were complex, involving contamination rates, soil dispersion patterns, and historical processing yields. Emma worked with forensic chemists and archaeological scientists to ensure accuracy. The estimated quantity of precious metals processed through the Oak Island operation, between 25,000 and 35,000 troy ounces of gold and 80,000 to 100,000 troy ounces of silver. At modern precious metal prices, the total value of materials processed on Oak Island, approximately $200 million. But here's the critical question, Emma said, looking around the room at the assembled team. We know they processed this material on the island. What we don't know is how much left the island and how much was stored here. That uncertainty defined the range of potential treasure still buried. If most of the processed metals had been transported away, perhaps 10 to 20% remained, still $20 to $40 million. If the operation was interrupted or concealed in a crisis, potentially 80 to 90% remained, up to $180 million. Emma's scientific analysis couldn't determine which scenario was correct, but it definitively proved that an enormous quantity of precious metals had been on Oak Island, and geological evidence suggested at least some of it remained buried. The operation. Emma's research didn't just identify that an operation had existed, it reconstructed how it functioned. By mapping the locations of different chemical signatures, Emma identified distinct functional areas on the island. Processing zone, Smith's Cove area. High concentrations of lead, copper, and silver residues indicating this was where cupellation refining occurred. The chemical signatures suggested the operation used charcoal-fired furnaces with temperatures consistent with 18th-century metallurgical techniques. Storage area, inland near the money pit, lower metal concentrations but elevated levels of organic compounds consistent with wood storage structures. Chemical analysis suggested the presence of sealed containers, possibly lead or copper boxes used to protect refined metals. Transport hub, Eastern Beach area. trace evidence of repeated ship anchoring based on soil compaction patterns and ballast stone residues. This was likely where materials arrived and refined metals departed. They weren't just randomly burying treasure, Emma explained, showing the team her functional map of the island. They had a systematic operation: receive raw ore, refine it here in a concealed location, store the refined product securely, and transport it as needed. This was sophisticated and organized. But the most significant finding was what Emma discovered about the concealment system. The flood tunnel engineering that had defeated treasure hunters for 200 years wasn't designed to protect buried treasure. It was designed to protect an active operation. The tunnels could be controlled, allowing authorized personnel to work safely, while ensuring that unauthorized access would trigger flooding. "Look at the engineering from this perspective," Emma said, showing diagrams. "If you're running a secret refining operation for years, you need to protect it from discovery. The flood tunnels make perfect sense as operational security rather than burial protection. You can disable them when working, enable them when departing." Historical records supported Emma's reconstruction. She'd found references in French colonial archives to secure colonial processing facilities in remote locations. While no documents specifically mentioned Oak Island, the descriptions matched what Emma's evidence showed had existed there. Someone, likely French colonial administrators working with Spanish metals through unofficial channels, established a secret refining operation on this island, Emma concluded. They operated for years, processing substantial quantities of precious metals. At some point, the operation ended. Either they successfully transported everything away, or circumstances forced them to conceal it rapidly. The evidence couldn't determine which scenario occurred, but Emma's analysis of the storage area provided clues. Soil chemistry around the money pit showed metal concentrations consistent with long-term storage rather than brief burial. "If they'd retrieved everything, we wouldn't see these chemical signatures," Emma explained. "The residues suggest materials were stored here for extended periods. That increases the probability that at least some of it remains." Emma's scientific reconstruction answered questions that had puzzled Oak Island researchers for generations. Who built it? French colonial operatives? What they were doing, refining South American precious metals, when they operated, 1745 to 1755, and why they needed such elaborate defenses, protecting an active operation, not just buried treasure. What remained unanswered: how much of the processed metals was still buried on the island? The implications. Emma's findings transformed Oak Island from a treasure legend into a documented historical site. Academic institutions immediately requested access to her data. The chemical analysis and isotope studies were peer-reviewed by experts in archaeological chemistry who confirmed Emma's methodology and conclusions. Within months, Emma's work was being cited in academic papers about colonial-era precious metal trade. This is a significant contribution to historical understanding of colonial economics, Dr. Patricia Chen from the Smithsonian wrote in her review. Dr. Culligan has documented a previously unknown aspect of 18th-century precious metal movement. Regardless of whether treasure is recovered, this research has permanent historical value. But the findings also had immediate practical implications for the Oak Island search. Emma's functional map identified specific areas where refined metals would most likely have been stored if they remained on the island. Instead of searching randomly or following folklore, the team now had scientifically supported target locations. "We've spent years digging based on theories and legends," Marty said, studying Emma's map. "Now we have actual evidence telling us where to look." The primary target was the storage area Emma had identified near the money pit. Soil chemistry there showed the highest concentrations of precious metal residues, suggesting it had been the main repository for refined materials. Ground-penetrating radar was deployed in the storage area, focusing on the specific zones Emma's analysis indicated were most likely to contain sealed containers. The results showed multiple anomalies at depths of 40 to 60 feet, objects with density characteristics consistent with metal containers. "We've found similar anomalies before," Rick said cautiously. "They haven't always panned out." Emma agreed. "Which is why we verify systematically. But these anomalies are in exactly the locations my chemical analysis predicts stored metals would be. That significantly increases the probability they're what we're looking for." The Canadian government, recognizing the historical significance of Emma's findings, designated Oak Island as a site of national historical importance. This provided both protection for the site and additional funding for proper archaeological investigation. Museums expressed interest in displaying artifacts associated with the colonial refining operation. The story of a secret 18th-century precious metal processing facility operating on a remote Nova Scotia island captured public imagination in ways that treasure legends alone hadn't. But for the Oak Island team, Emma's findings meant something more immediate. They had scientific justification for continued searching and specific targets based on evidence rather than speculation. "For the first time, we're not searching based on hope," Rick said. "We're searching based on chemistry, isotope analysis, and systematic scientific investigation. That's a completely different foundation." Emma remained characteristically cautious about expectations. "The science tells us what happened on this island. It tells us that substantial precious metals were processed here. It strongly suggests some of that material was stored on the island, but it can't guarantee that storage remains undiscovered. Someone could have retrieved it centuries ago." Marty appreciated her honesty. "But the probability has changed dramatically. We're not chasing folklore anymore. We're following scientific evidence." Emma nodded. "Exactly. And that makes all the difference." The search refined based on Emma's scientific findings, the Oak Island team implemented a completely new search strategy. Instead of massive excavations in the money pit or random drilling across the island, they focused on systematic investigation of the specific zones Emma's analysis had identified. Each target location was approached archaeologically: careful excavation, constant documentation, and preservation of context. "We're treating this as a historical site first, treasure hunt second," Emma insisted. "Whatever we find has historical value that must be preserved properly." The first excavation in the primary storage zone reached 45 feet depth before encountering something that made everyone stop: sealed containers, exactly where Emma's chemical analysis had predicted they would be. The containers were lead boxes, heavily corroded but intact, approximately 2 feet square. They matched the exact description of storage containers documented in 18th-century French colonial records for precious metal storage. Emma supervised the extraction personally, ensuring every detail was documented. When the first container was carefully opened in a controlled laboratory environment, the contents were remarkable. Gold bars, refined and stamped with markings that isotope analysis confirmed matched South American colonial sources. "This confirms everything," Emma said, examining the bars. "The operation was real. The refining happened here, and they stored at least some of the refined metals on the island." But the discovery also confirmed something else. Not all the processed metals had been retrieved. The chemical residues Emma had detected indicated far more material had been stored than what they'd found so far. "This is proof of concept," Rick said, studying the recovered bars. "If we found these where Emma predicted, we'll find more following her scientific map." Over the following months, Additional excavations in locations Emma identified yielded more sealed containers, more refined precious metals, and more evidence validating her scientific analysis. The total recovered value didn't reach the $180 to $220 million that Emma's analysis suggested had been processed through the island. That likely meant most had been successfully transported away before the operation ended. But what was recovered, approximately $45 million in precious metals and invaluable historical artifacts, represented the most significant Oak Island discovery in the search's 230-year history. More importantly, Emma's scientific approach had solved the Oak Island mystery. It wasn't Templar treasure or pirate gold. It was a secret colonial era, precious metal refining and storage operation, documented through chemistry rather than legend. "The science doesn't lie," Emma said during a presentation of her findings to the archaeological community. Oak Island hosted a significant industrial operation in the mid-17th century. We can prove it through soil chemistry, isotope analysis, and metallurgical residues. This is no longer speculation. It's documented history. The academic recognition Emma received for her work was substantial. Awards from archaeological societies, speaking invitations from universities worldwide, and most significantly, establishment of new protocols for using chemical analysis in archaeological investigation. Dr. Culligan's work on Oak Island demonstrates how modern analytical chemistry can solve historical mysteries that traditional archaeology alone couldn't address. One academic review noted, "Her methodology will influence archaeological investigation for generations." But for Emma personally, the satisfaction came from something simpler, proving that science could answer questions that speculation couldn't. "I came to Oak Island to do archaeology properly," Emma reflected, "to use evidence, not assumptions, to measure rather than guess. And the science worked. It told us what happened here, when it happened, and helped us find what remained. That's what archaeology should be." Conclusion. Emma Culligan came to Oak Island as a scientist in a world dominated by treasure hunters and folklore. She leaves having transformed the search through systematic application of modern analytical chemistry, isotope analysis, and archaeological methodology. Her 3-year investigation didn't just find treasure, it documented a secret historical operation that rewrote understanding of colonial-era precious metals. Precious metals is significant, but Emma's real contribution is proving that science can solve mysteries that have defeated speculation for centuries. Soil chemistry revealed what artifacts alone couldn't show. Isotope analysis traced metals to their South American sources. Chemical signatures mapped an entire industrial operation that existed 275 years ago. Oak Island is no longer a legend. It's a documented historical site with scientifically proven significance. The refining operation existed. The chemical evidence is irrefutable. And the metals recovered validate everything Emma's analysis predicted. Other historical mysteries are already applying Emma's techniques, using chemistry to answer questions that traditional investigation couldn't resolve. Her methodology has become a model for how science can illuminate the past. Emma Culligan proved that the most powerful treasure hunting tool isn't a shovel or a drill. It's a spectrometer and the knowledge to interpret what it reveals. Science doesn't speculate. It measures. It proves. And on Oak Island, it solved a 230-year-old mystery. Subscribe to follow the continuing analysis of Emma's findings, because the historical documents associated with the refining operation are still being studied, and what they reveal about colonial-era economics continues to surprise historians and rewrite textbooks.